I told both families I was legally adopting Grace, my ex-wife's affair baby, and the silence in that room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was a 5-year-old girl who had been born from the betrayal that destroyed my marriage, and I was announcing my intention to make her officially my daughter. This was after 3 years of divorce proceedings, paternity tests that confirmed Grace wasn't biologically mine, and countless family discussions about how Olivia's one-time mistake had torn apart what everyone thought was a perfect marriage between a successful biologist and his devoted wife. But what shocked everyone the most wasn't that I was willing to forgive Olivia's affair. It was that I had spent the last 3 years falling in love with a little girl who called me Daddy Ethan, and had no idea that the man who read her bedtime stories and taught her to ride a bike wasn't her biological father. My parents stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Olivia's parents looked confused and grateful in equal measure, and Olivia herself sat there crying, probably wondering how the man she'd betrayed with her colleague could now be fighting to legally claim the child that had ended their marriage. What none of them understood was that filing for divorce had been the easy part. The hard part was realizing that Grace had become the most important person in my life, and that biology had nothing to do with what made someone your family. The affair that destroyed my marriage gave me the daughter I was meant to have, and I was about to prove that love is stronger than betrayal DNA, and everyone's expectations about how a betrayed husband should behave. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the greatest gift comes wrapped in the worst betrayal, and how our kids became more important than our hurt. My name is Ethan, and I'm 35 years old. 5 years ago, I thought I had the perfect life with my wife Olivia, who was 28 at the time. I worked as a research biologist for a pharmaceutical company, earning a comfortable salary that allowed Olivia to stay home and focus on our future family plans. We'd been married for 6 years when everything fell apart, and for most of those years, we'd been the couple that other people envied. I had a stable career in scientific research. Olivia was beautiful and devoted to our home, and we lived in a nice suburban house with plans to fill it with children when the timing was right. Everyone said we were the perfect traditional couple, successful husband, supportive wife, solid financial foundation, and a shared vision for our future that included the white picket fence dream that so many people talk about but few actually achieve. Ethan and Olivia had built what seemed like a perfect traditional marriage. Our arrangement worked well in the beginning. I was the primary breadwinner, focused on advancing my career and building the financial security that would allow us to have the family we both wanted. Olivia managed our household, maintained our social relationships, and created the kind of warm, welcoming home that made me excited to come back from long days at the lab. She was incredibly good at being a wife in all the traditional ways that mattered. Olivia cooked elaborate dinners, kept our house spotless, remembered everyone's birthdays and anniversaries, and made sure I never had to worry about anything domestic so I could concentrate on my research and career advancement. But over time, I started noticing that Olivia seemed restless with our arrangement. She'd make comments about feeling isolated during the day, about missing the intellectual stimulation she'd had when she worked before our marriage, about feeling like she was losing her identity in our perfectly organized domestic life. Olivia started expressing frustration about feeling isolated and unfulfilled at home. Looking back, I can see the warning signs that I ignored at the time. Olivia and I had stopped having real conversations about anything meaningful. Our discussions became purely functional work schedules, household maintenance, social obligations that needed to be managed. I was so focused on building our financial future that I didn't notice how emotionally distant we'd become. I'd come home from the lab, exhausted from complex research projects, and Olivia would update me on her day, but I wasn't really listening. I was mentally still at work, thinking about experiments and data analysis, rather than connecting with my wife. We were living parallel lives in the same house, both working toward the same goals, but not actually experiencing them together. I thought our marriage was stable because we didn't fight, but the truth was we weren't communicating enough to have anything worth fighting about. Their conversations became functional rather than intimate, focused on schedules rather than dreams. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening in March when Olivia told me she was pregnant. I was working on research data at my home computer when she came into the study with a pregnancy test in her hand and a strange expression on her face that I couldn't quite read. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, sitting down across from me with the kind of serious tone that immediately made me close my laptop and give her my full attention. "I'm pregnant." My first reaction was pure joy. We'd been talking about starting a family for months, and this felt like the natural next step in our carefully planned life together. But something about Olivia's demeanor made me pause before celebrating. She didn't look happy or excited, she looked worried, almost scared. When I started asking about timing and due dates, trying to calculate when conception had happened based on our recent intimacy, I realized that the numbers didn't add up in a way that made sense with our relationship timeline. Olivia's pregnancy announcement came with timing that didn't add up. That's when Olivia broke down and told me the truth that would destroy our marriage and change both of our lives forever. She'd had an affair with her colleague Marcus, someone she'd been working with on a freelance marketing project that was supposed to give her the intellectual stimulation she'd been missing as a stay-at-home wife. "It was only one time," she said through tears, using the phrase that would become burned into my memory forever. "It was a one-time mistake, Ethan. I was feeling so lonely and disconnected, and Marcus was paying attention to me in a way that made me feel like myself again." But the pregnancy meant that this one-time mistake had created a permanent life-altering consequence. Olivia couldn't be certain whether the baby was mine or Marcus's, which meant that everything about our future, our marriage, our family, our carefully planned life was now completely uncertain. The affair itself was devastating enough, but the possibility that I might be raising another man's child, while my wife had been lying to me about the most fundamental aspects of our relationship, felt like a betrayal so deep I couldn't see how we'd ever recover from it. Olivia confessed the baby might not be mine after calling it a one-time mistake. The first 48 hours after Olivia's confession were a complete emotional blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and couldn't focus on anything at work because my mind kept cycling between rage betrayal and a strange kind of grief for the marriage I thought we'd had. My initial instinct was to pack a bag and leave immediately, but I forced myself to think logically about the situation before making any permanent decisions. I called my brother David and my best friend from college to get perspective from people who cared about me but weren't emotionally invested in my marriage. Everyone I talked to had the same advice: get a lawyer, get a paternity test, and protect myself legally before making any decisions about forgiveness or reconciliation. The betrayal was devastating, but the potential financial and emotional implications of raising another man's child while being deceived made this more than just a marriage problem. Ethan's first instinct was filing for divorce before the baby was even born. The paternity test became the focal point of everything because it would determine not just the biological truth, but the entire legal and emotional landscape of our future. Olivia agreed to a prenatal paternity test which could be done safely during the second trimester and would give us definitive answers about the baby's biological father. Waiting for those test results felt like living in suspended animation. Every conversation Olivia and I had was colored by the uncertainty of whether we were discussing our child or Marcus's child, whether we were trying to save our marriage or just managing the logistics of separating two lives that had been intertwined for 6 years. I found myself alternating between hope that the baby was mine and would somehow make this betrayal easier to forgive and dread that the baby was mine and I'd be forever connected to Olivia through a child conceived during the worst period of our marriage. The paternity test would determine everything about their future. My lawyer Rebecca Chen was direct about the legal realities I was facing. If the baby was biologically mine, I'd have parental rights and responsibilities regardless of what happened to the marriage. If the baby wasn't mine, I could walk away cleanly with no legal obligations to support Olivia or the child. She explained the importance of protecting my financial assets during the divorce proceedings, regardless of paternity, and helped me understand that emotional decisions made during this crisis could have long-term consequences for my financial security and future relationships. Rebecca also prepared me for the possibility that even if the baby wasn't biologically mine, I might still feel emotionally attached to the child, especially if Olivia and I attempted reconciliation during the pregnancy. She wanted me to think clearly about what I could and couldn't handle emotionally before the baby was born. The lawyer explained that biological paternity would determine everything in court. When I told both sets of parents about the affair and pregnancy, the reactions were exactly what I expected, but still painful to experience. My parents were furious with Olivia and immediately supportive of divorce proceedings. Olivia's parents were devastated and embarrassed, but they also seemed to be hoping that the baby would turn out to be mine and somehow save the marriage. My mother was particularly direct. Ethan, you can't spend your life wondering if your wife is telling you the truth about fundamental things like whose child you're raising. Trust is the foundation of marriage, and she's destroyed that. Olivia's parents took a different approach, talking about forgiveness, the sanctity of marriage, and the importance of family unity during difficult times. But even they couldn't offer a convincing argument for how we'd rebuild trust after such a massive betrayal. Both families struggled with supporting Ethan while processing Olivia's betrayal. The paternity test results arrived on a Thursday morning in July, and I opened the envelope in Rebecca's office with Olivia sitting beside me. The lab report was clinical and definitive. Marcus was the biological father of the baby Olivia was carrying. Reading those results felt like a strange combination of relief and devastation. Relief because I could walk away from this situation without any legal obligations to support another man's child. Devastation because it confirmed that my wife's betrayal was complete and irreversible. There would be no fairy tale ending where love conquered all. Olivia cried when we read the results, but I felt oddly calm. The uncertainty that had been torturing me for months was finally over, and I could make decisions based on facts rather than hope or fear. The test confirmed Grace was not Ethan's biological daughter. With paternity established, my divorce proceedings moved forward rapidly. There were no custody issues to negotiate, no child support calculations to determine, and no complex co-parenting arrangements to establish. This was a straightforward dissolution of marriage between two adults with no shared children. Rebecca handled the paperwork efficiently, and Olivia didn't contest any of my requests for asset division or terms of separation. She seemed to understand that she was in no position to make demands given that her affair had caused the divorce and her pregnancy made reconciliation impossible. The emotional part of me wanted to drag out the proceedings to punish Olivia for what she'd done, but the logical part knew that a quick, clean separation was better for everyone involved. I wanted to start rebuilding my life as soon as possible. Filing for divorce felt like the only path to self-respect and healing. Grace was born on a cold December morning, and despite everything that had happened, I found myself at the hospital when Olivia went into labor. I'm not sure why I went. Maybe curiosity, maybe some misplaced sense of obligation, maybe just the need to see this chapter of my life reach its conclusion. Holding Grace for the first time was unexpectedly emotional. She was tiny and perfect and completely innocent of all the adult drama that had brought her into the world. Looking at her, I couldn't feel any resentment or anger. She was just a baby who deserved love and stability regardless of how she'd been conceived. Marcus was there, too awkward and uncertain about his role as the biological father. He'd been supportive during Olivia's pregnancy, but it was clear that he wasn't prepared for the reality of being responsible for a child born from an affair that had destroyed someone else's marriage. Meeting Grace for the first time made everything more complicated. Even though I had no legal connection to Grace, the divorce decree included provisions for my continued relationship with her if I chose to maintain one. Rebecca had insisted on this clause, explaining that emotional attachments formed during pregnancy sometimes continued after birth, and it was better to have legal framework in place. The arrangement allowed me to visit Grace and maintain a relationship with her, but established clear boundaries about my financial responsibilities and legal standing. I wasn't required to support her financially, but I also had no parental rights that would give me any say in decisions about her upbringing. This framework seemed theoretical when we were drafting it, but after meeting Grace, I realized that I wanted to be part of her life in whatever way Olivia and Marcus would allow. Legal arrangements meant Grace would still be part of Ethan's extended life. The legal documentation for our divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday in February, 8 months after Grace's birth. I sat in Rebecca's office reviewing the final decree which officially dissolved my marriage to Olivia and established the legal framework that would govern our separate lives going forward. The divorce papers included detailed asset division, confirming that I would keep the house and most of our savings, while Olivia received a smaller settlement and temporary spousal support. More importantly, the decree clearly stated that I had no financial obligations toward Grace, but it also preserved my right to maintain a relationship with her if I chose to do so. Rebecca had also included a clause that protected me from any future claims regarding Grace's paternity or support, ensuring that my decision to remain involved in her life couldn't be used against me legally if circumstances changed. The papers made our separation official, but looking at Grace's birth certificate attached to the file, I realized that nothing about this situation felt finished. The legal papers made everything official, but nothing felt finished. As part of the divorce proceedings, both families had provided sworn testimony about the marriage, the affair, and everyone's character and fitness as parents or potential influences in Grace's life. My parents testified about my stability and responsibility, while Olivia's parents spoke about her remorse and commitment to being a good mother despite her mistake. The court had required character witnesses to establish the emotional and financial environment that Grace would be growing up in. Marcus had also provided testimony about his intentions and capabilities as Grace's biological father, though his statements revealed uncertainty about his readiness for parenthood. Reading through these sworn statements was like seeing our entire family crisis documented in formal legal language. Everyone's private pain and complicated emotions had been reduced to official testimony that would remain part of the public record forever. Both families testified about the marriage, the affair, and everyone's character. The court had thoroughly documented my financial stability and parenting capacity during the proceedings, even though I had no legal claim to Grace. My income as a research biologist, my clean legal record, and my emotional stability during the crisis had all been evaluated and certified by Family Services. These assessments established that I was financially and emotionally capable of supporting a child should I ever choose to pursue adoption or custody arrangements in the future. The documentation also confirmed that my home environment was stable and appropriate for child rearing. Meanwhile, Marcus's financial evaluation revealed that while he was employed, his income was significantly lower than mine and his living situation was less stable. The court had noted these disparities without making judgments, but the documentation was clear about the comparative resources available to Grace from different potential father figures. The court documented everyone's fitness as parents and providers. The biological father's legal status was established through formal paternity acknowledgement, which made Marcus legally responsible for Grace's financial support and gave him official parental rights. However, his actual involvement in Grace's daily care remained minimal throughout her first year. Marcus paid the required child support and visited Grace occasionally, but it became clear that he wasn't prepared for the practical realities of fatherhood. His relationship with Olivia remained awkward and strained, focused primarily on coordinating his limited time with Grace rather than building any kind of co-parenting partnership. The legal framework established Marcus's obligations, but it couldn't create the emotional connection or commitment that effective parenting required. The biological father's legal obligations were established, but his involvement remained minimal. When the final divorce decree was signed, I experienced a strange combination of relief and melancholy. The official end of my marriage represented freedom from the betrayal and uncertainty that had dominated my life for nearly a year, but it also marked the end of dreams and plans that had defined my identity for years. Walking out of the courthouse as a legally single man felt both liberating and terrifying. I was free to rebuild my life however I chose, but I was also starting over at 31 with none of the future I'd spent years planning and saving for. What surprised me most was realizing that my strongest emotion wasn't anger at Olivia or relief at being free from the marriage, it was concern about Grace's future and my role in it. The legal process was complete, but my emotional investment in that little girl was just beginning. Divorce finalization felt like death and birth happening simultaneously. The 3 years following my divorce were the most transformative period of my adult life. I threw myself into therapy, focusing my career on research projects that challenged me intellectually and slowly rebuilt my sense of identity as a single man rather than a betrayed husband. During this time, I learned to separate my anger about Olivia's affair from my genuine affection for Grace, who had become a constant presence in my life despite having no legal connection to me. I visited her every weekend, attended her daycare performances, and gradually became the most stable father figure in her world. My therapist helped me understand that my relationship with Grace wasn't about forgiving Olivia or trying to salvage something from my failed marriage. It was about recognizing that love doesn't always follow biological lines, and that Grace deserved consistency from the adults in her life, regardless of how she'd been conceived. 3 years of healing taught Ethan about love, family, and forgiveness. Grace started calling me Daddy Ethan when she was 2 years old, and by the time she turned 3, I was the person she ran to when she was scared, the one she wanted to read her bedtime stories, and the adult she trusted most for comfort and security. Watching Grace grow up reinforced my understanding that fatherhood isn't about biology, It's about showing up consistently, providing emotional support, and creating a safe environment where a child can develop and thrive. Marcus remained largely absent despite his legal obligations, visiting Grace sporadically and contributing financially, but never developing the emotional connection that real parenting requires. Our relationship felt natural and genuine in a way that surprised everyone, including me. Grace had no concept that I wasn't her real father, and I found myself caring about her well-being, her development, and her future with the intensity of any devoted parent. Grace became the most important relationship in Ethan's life. Meanwhile, Olivia struggled with single parenthood in ways that became increasingly obvious over time. She was overwhelmed by the demands of caring for Grace alone, stressed about her limited financial resources, and isolated from many of the social connections that had supported her during our marriage. Marcus provided the required child support, but little practical help with day-to-day parenting responsibilities. Olivia often called me when she needed backup childcare, when Grace was sick and she couldn't miss work, or when she simply needed advice about managing a toddler's behavior. Our co-parenting relationship evolved into something that worked for Grace's benefit, even though it was complicated by our history. We focused on Grace's needs rather than our past conflicts, and we both recognized that I had become an essential source of stability in Grace's young life. Olivia's parenting struggles highlighted Grace's need for stability. By Grace's fourth birthday, I had started seriously considering legal adoption. The idea had been growing in my mind for months as I realized that I wanted to formalize my role in Grace's life and ensure that I could continue being her father regardless of any changes in Olivia's circumstances. I consulted with a family law attorney who specialized in step-parent and third-party adoptions. She explained that adoption would give me full parental rights and responsibilities, making me Grace's legal father in every sense. The process would require Olivia's consent and potentially Marcus's consent as well, depending on his level of involvement and willingness to terminate his parental rights. The legal consultation confirmed what my heart already knew. I wanted to be Grace's father officially, permanently, and completely. This wasn't about my relationship with Olivia or my feelings about the affair that had brought Grace into existence. This was about love, commitment, and giving Grace the security of knowing that I would always be her dad. Ethan decided to legally adopt Grace despite everyone's shock. The family meeting where I announced my intention to adopt Grace took place in my parents' living room on a Sunday afternoon in November. Both sets of parents were there along with Olivia, and the tension in the room was palpable before I even started speaking. "I've made a decision about Grace," I said, looking around at faces that ranged from curious to concerned. "I'm going to legally adopt her. I want to be her father officially, not just emotionally." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother was the first to speak, asking if I'd lost my mind. Olivia's parents looked confused and grateful. Olivia herself started crying immediately, overwhelmed by the implications of what I was offering to do. "This isn't about forgiveness or trying to fix our marriage," I explained to the room. "This is about Grace deserving a father who chooses to love her completely." Both families were shocked when Ethan announced his adoption plans. The legal adoption process required court hearings, background checks, and formal documentation that would make me Grace's legal father in every sense of the word. Judge Sarah Martinez presided over the proceedings, reviewing my financial stability, my relationship with Grace, and my commitment to her long-term well-being. Marcus had to formally terminate his parental rights, which he did willingly after admitting that he wasn't prepared for the responsibilities of fatherhood. His lawyer explained that he would be released from all financial obligations and legal responsibilities once the adoption was finalized. The judge interviewed Grace privately to confirm that she understood what adoption meant and that she wanted me to be her legal father. Grace told Judge Martinez that I was already her real daddy and that she wanted it to be official forever. When the judge signed the adoption decree, I felt a profound sense of completion that I hadn't expected. Grace was legally mine and I was legally hers, creating a bond that couldn't be broken by anyone's mistakes or poor decisions. The judge approved the adoption, making Grace officially Ethan's daughter. The extended family's acceptance of the adoption took time, but eventually both sets of grandparents embraced Grace as their granddaughter without reservation. My parents, who had initially worried about my emotional well-being, came to see that Grace brought joy and purpose to my life in ways that nothing else had. Olivia's parents were grateful that Grace would have the stability and security that my adoption provided, especially since Marcus's involvement remained minimal even after the legal proceedings were complete. Both sets of grandparents welcomed Grace as their granddaughter. What emerged from the adoption was a family structure that nobody had anticipated, but that worked beautifully for everyone involved. Grace had a devoted father who had chosen to love her, a mother who was committed to her well-being, and extended family support from grandparents who adored her. I started referring to Grace as my daughter, without any qualifiers or explanations. She was mine in every way that mattered legally, emotionally, and practically. When people asked about our relationship, I simply said she was my daughter because that's exactly what she was. The adoption created a family bond that transcended biology betrayal and everyone's initial expectations about how betrayed husbands should behave. Grace and I became father and daughter not because of DNA or marriage, but because we chose each other and committed to loving each other unconditionally. Grace became our kids in a way that transcended biology. 5 years after the adoption, Grace is now 10 years old and thriving as my daughter in every sense of the word. She excels in school, plays soccer on weekends, and has the kind of secure, loving relationship with me that every child deserves. When people meet us, they see a devoted father and his beloved daughter. No one questions our bond or asks about biology. Grace knows the story of how she became my daughter, told in age-appropriate ways that emphasize choice, love, and commitment rather than the adult mistakes that brought us together. She understands that I chose to be her father because I loved her, not because I had to be. 5 years later, Grace thrives as Ethan's beloved daughter. The experience taught me that family isn't about biology or traditional expectations. It's about showing up consistently, loving unconditionally, and choosing each other every day. I eventually remarried a wonderful woman named Sarah who loves Grace as her own daughter, creating the blended family that Grace deserves. Marcus remains a distant figure in Grace's life, paying support but never developing the emotional connection that real fatherhood requires. Olivia and I have built a respectful co-parenting relationship focused entirely on Grace's well-being, proving that people can move beyond betrayal when a child's future is at stake. Looking back, I realized that Olivia's affair, devastating as it was at the time, ultimately gave me the most important relationship of my life. Grace became my daughter not despite the circumstances of her conception, but because love is stronger than biology, betrayal, and everyone's expectations about how families should be formed. The affair that broke his marriage gave him the family he was meant to have.